Before we get on with the show, you know where to find us. At MI in the Hunt on Twitter. Me at JMendel94. Topher's not here today, but you know what? Go on Twitter, at Cochrane Runaway. Wish him a happy birthday. He's 30 years old. He's old as Ryan Tannehill. Come on, he's only got a couple more years left in the league. He deserves it. Listen to us, Podbean Podcast. We'll go with it. We'll wing it. iTunes, Spotify, fins up. Let's get on with the show. The In the Hump podcast is back. As always, I am Jake Mendel, and Topher just turned Ryan Tannehill 30, so we're without him today. But instead, I have the re-energized, the rejuvenated Travis Wingfield with me to kind of try to... Well, we might not walk off the ledge a little bit. We might still jump off the ledge, but how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good, man. You mentioned that I'm kind of back off the ledge a little bit, and that's kind of true. I think those emotional tweets after the game tend to go a little bit too far in one direction, whether it's positive or negative. But there's some things that just kind of worry me long-term now that I wasn't really thinking about before the season, but I'm sure we'll get to those.
For sure. And before we get to doom and gloom, the Dolphins defense and even the special teams have looked pretty great. Specifically for me, I want to talk about Jerome Baker and just how, early on, he always had the speed. He was always all over the field, but now, he's hitting holes at the right point. He's getting to the quarterback. He had 2 sacks. What have you seen from him that you liked specifically?
The same things that we saw at Ohio State, I talked about it in his film study, was just his recognition for spacing and just that spatial awareness that a lot of players really don't have. I mean, we always talk about how fast a guy is, how high he can jump, his broad jump, all those measurables. But you just watch the way a guy plays and the speed he has and the understanding of angles, and I mentioned that spatial awareness. He seems to have all those things and the ability to kind of blitz that A gap and get skinny through the hole, but also find a way to occupy a blocker and free up somebody else. Now, on the game on Sunday, he didn't have to do that. He got to the quarterback himself. He has that great sideline-to-sideline speed. I just think this guy is going to be one of their draft hits because of what he offers at the position that most teams are kind of trending in that direction with more speed and athleticism. He has both of those in spades.
And I highly recommend, if you want to read any of Travis's articles, these incredibly detailed articles, LockedOnDolphins.com. He's got the podcast, and on Twitter at Wingfield NFL, right?
That's right.
For sure. All right, so we'll stick there for a second with the 2018 draft class. For years upon years, we saw the Dolphins look so foolish in the screen game on the defensive side of the ball. How great is it? There was one play that stands out to me specifically where they had trips right, the Bengals did, and the Dolphins had Howard and Minkah Fitzpatrick over there. So it was a 2-on-3. Obviously, they're going to throw the ball that way. Minkah blew by 2 guys and still, tackle him for a loss. The speed, like you mentioned with Baker, it doesn't get much better than Minkah Fitzpatrick.
He's awesome, man. It's so fun to watch him play ball. And it's the same guy we saw at Alabama. And there's 2 reasons you make that play. One, just your overall will to make a tackle. Mm-hmm. And 2, being prepared for the game on Sunday. And we saw both those things with Minkah. We know those are 2 things that he has in spades because you're not going to shoot that play unless you have something that told you that was coming before the snap actually occurs. So you knew that he knew what he was doing. And then 2, to get through the block and to get into the backfield. That was the play before the Jakeem Grant punt return. So that's a huge play in the game. And this guy is going to just continue to do that throughout the course of his career. And I hope it's 10 years plus with the Dolphins.
That'd be so exciting to watch. And the one thing the announcers kept saying about Fitzpatrick that it's a great compliment, but I don't necessarily know I agree with it because they kept saying he might be the best tackler on this team. How great is it to, be able to, I don't want to say forget about Rashad Jones, but know that someone else is playing just as well as him?
It's something they've needed for so long. They never really had a pairing with Rashad Jones. And though Minka's not playing safety right now, it's always been like, I think Louis Delmas or maybe Chris Clemens was the best safety pairing we had with Rashad Jones. Mm-hmm. So to have somebody else in that back end of the secondary that can do the same things in terms of range and getting guys to the ground, which is kind of an undervalued aspect of the game at this point in 2018 when tackling has kind of gone by the wayside. So yeah, man, it's a big lift to the defense and definitely helps them stop big plays from becoming huge plays. And of course, like with the screenplay we saw, stop positive plays and turn them into negative ones.
Exactly. And Rashad was the number 1 graded PFF player on the defensive side of the ball. Number 2 actually got a lot of hate on Twitter, and he's gotten some hate so far this season. I haven't really seen it. I won't say he's looked great, but he hasn't looked bad, and that's Raekwon McMillan.
Yeah, he had his best game as a pro so far, in my opinion. A couple of run stops in there and just playing downhill. But he also was decent in coverage, which is something you don't really expect from Raekwon at this point in his career. But I think he's getting better every week, which is positive to see. It's kind of tough to evaluate those, in between the B gap type of linebackers in today's NFL because you don't really notice them unless they're making a stop, 3-4 yards down the field. And he was doing a good job coming forward to make tackles. So that's exciting to see from him. But yeah, the entire linebacker crew I thought played pretty good yesterday.
Exactly, and one of the things that I always noticed, especially with linebacking core specifically, we see it with Kiko, and it's a good thing when you don't hear their name. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily they don't need to always be in the center of attention. Like you said, it's filling the gaps and those things you can't really grade or look at tackles for. But one thing we can grade, and the Dolphins have kind of had an issue with, is penalties. So that TJ McDonald flag ended up being huge in
Oof.
terms of that game. How did you feel about it? Because when I saw it, I kind of got both sides. I understand that McDonald's trying to make a play. I understand they're trying to make the league safer. I probably wouldn't have called it, but I kind of see what the refs were, thinking, where he could have kind of held up a little bit once the ball went through his hands.
I was with you in terms of not really having a side on it before today because on the actual broadcast angle, it looked like my thought was that, what are you doing, man? Like, you didn't have to make that hit. The ball was clearly going over his head. But then I saw another angle on Twitter today, and it looked like he just was trying to break up a pass that might have been completed. So I think that, the league, it's hard to defend that call when, for instance, like that Geno Atkins play where he actually put his face mask on Ryan Tannehill's face mask.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to defend that call when the Dolphins aren't getting the same love. So I think that one, I mean, if they don't make that call, the Dolphins probably win that game. So yeah, it sucks.
Right, and on that same drive, I'm gonna argue this one. This is the reason why that drive was a mess. The thing that bothered me the most is Charles Harris. The drafted in the first round. You look at the two other guys drafted in that shortly after Harris. Tack McKinley and Taco Charlton have combined for 15 sacks and 4 forced fumbles. Harris has 2 sacks. And he could have had 2 more yesterday, and there was the first one, I believe it was Baker's first sack, and they said, well, Harris almost got there. And then the second one, Harris just kind of, it looked like took a horrible route to Dalton. And you could keep saying the almost is great and the almost he's getting there, but we got rid of Olivier Vernon, so we had someone who could do more than just almost get to the quarterback.
Yeah, pressures are fun until they don't actually result in anything, right? So that's kind of what's
Exactly.
been his problem. And it's been a problem for the Dolphins for a couple of years now, actually. I mean, you look back to last year, and Cameron Wake gets so many sacks that you just kind of you gloss over it. But how many times did he have Tyrod Taylor in the grasp in those Bills games and couldn't get him down? These guys, for whatever reason, they struggle to finish. And Robert Quinn, I was tweeting all day, he's going to get home. He's going to get home. He never did because he just kept getting around that edge and couldn't find that finishing move. But when it comes to Charles Harris, I think he's just thinking too much because there's so much like sticky movement to his game where he's not fluid and he's not committed to what he's actually doing. He's changing directions very slowly, and it just looks like a guy that's thinking more than he should be, just reacting.
Right, and I guess the most disappointing part about it is, Wake, I don't think that injury is going to keep him out too long, and Branch is on the way back, so when we see Harris get 70% of snaps, you hope to see, like, a bright spot or a sign of development, but this was likely bearing another injury is probably going to be the last time he gets that amount of snaps, so it's going to be interesting to see if he's not doing it now. I guess the question is when it might happen.
Yeah, definitely. And he was a guy that we thought last year would be one of those sub-package rushers like a Tack McKinley or a Taco Charlton that can come in and get you 7 or 8 sacks in a sub-package role, but it hasn't happened so far. And like you mentioned, I mean, I don't see where he gets the reps when those guys get back. And he's such a crucial piece going into the offseason, not to jump, 11 games ahead of the Shark here, but it just with the position, with how much age there is there and how kind of there's a lack of production at the position, that's probably an area the Dolphins have to go in the first round if Charles Harris doesn't start making some immediate plays on defense, and it doesn't look like he's going to get that chance.
Exactly, and that's kind of why I was okay with the pick originally, but then because the age, you're now hitting the nail on the head there, but you just don't see the confidence in him where you'd kind of want out of a first round pick, and we're kind of seeing that out of most of the first round picks from the Dolphins recently.
Right.
Good thing we have Fitzpatrick. But, last time you were on the podcast, we were not going to talk Ryan Tannehill, and we're going to get there. But I want to talk about the entire offense because I think this is not necessarily a Tannehill issue, but he is definitely part of the issue. The whole offense is a mess. And it starts with Adam Gase, a quarterback guru, and yet the Dolphins are still averaging less than 5 plays a drive. I cannot wrap my head around that because I'm pretty sure the punt even counts as a play on a drive, even though you're turning the ball over. And that's with, in fact, that the Dolphins are starting on the 30-yard line on average, the best in the NFL, because shout out Jakeem Grant, the heart of all Dolphins right there.
I do the Tannehill charting every single week, and I don't think he's thrown a pass inside the red zone since week 1. I'm pretty sure that's what crazy. The numbers are right now. It's crazy. It's insane because it's either a big play or a 3-and-out or a turnover for this offense. And it's frustrating because there are so many concepts within this playbook and so many things they can execute that will continue drives and keep things rolling. I tweeted out during the game that, when the offense runs the ball like this, when Frank Gore has those 6-7 yard gains on a first down, this offense should be unstoppable because of the speed and the quickness and the threat they can put on the defense when they're in those favorable down and distances, but it just hasn't happened. And all the inconsistencies, it always seems like one guy is fucking up just enough for things to not work out. And it's really frustrating because I see the pieces on the team, and yeah, the offensive line is really banged up right now, but it should be working better than it is.
Right, because when we look at going into yesterday's game, I don't know how much it's been updated, but the Dolphins had the least amount of pressures in the NFL. Their line wasn't good, but it wasn't bad. That's kind of what we always wanted. That the argument for this team to have Gase is you don't need a great line, but just an okay one. Because the offense, I think they also showed us that Tannehill's getting it out the second fastest among quarterbacks because you have guys like Grant, Wilson, Amendola, and it's all these quick routes. But the issue with the offense is there's nobody that can, fight for a ball. You would hope that DeVante Parker is that guy that can win a 1v1, maybe not the greatest pass in the world, because I think back if there was a play with Jakeem Grant on the left side where it was almost intercepted because Grant decided to just run a different route instead of the slant. That's where you really miss a Parker, or even a second-round pick that's a huge athletic freak tight end who played 47% of snaps but only has 8 catches this year for 77 yards.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They need that big body that can kind of rebound and block guys out because DeVante Parker, those little square-in routes, the slants, the ones where you kind of have the outside release and cross back across the cornerback's face, that was really all he did last year outside of a few downfield shots. And you're right. I think they do miss that size and the ability to kind of have trust in that route because we've seen that route get picked off a few times in Tannehill's career. And a lot of that has to do with what Jakeem Grant did where he kind of bailed on the in cut. And you can't do that because it's all timing and it's all, precision. And if the quarterback's getting the ball out before you make your break, you're going to get that almost pick situation. So, I talk a lot of trash about DeVante Parker, and I think that this year he's kind of shown why I talk that trash. I mean, only available for 1 out of 5 games is not ideal. But you mentioned Mike Gesicki, and I talked about it on the Perfectville podcast last week. This team needs somebody that can run that seam route, that whole shot that Tannehill, that's his best throw that he's ever made in his career over and over again. That Charles Clay over the linebacker, under the safety, a little drop shot. He's fantastic at that throw between the numbers, and they don't have that guy this year. So it's a big concern.
The one play that I keep thinking about that made me really excited for Tannehill this year because a lot of people want to take away from him for the touch passes, and we could get into that, but that's not really what I'm focused about because every team does those. You can't take those away. But the play that I really loved from him was the touchdown to Derby because it just seems like we never see that step into the pocket and just fire. He's looked very tentative at times, and I thought that's what Gesicki could be, just someone who you're going to throw it at him. And I think there was like a 3rd and 4 or something where I believe everyone was covered, and Gesicki was literally the last option and ended up converting the first down. They need to use him a lot more and focus him a lot more because averaging less than 10 yards a reception is pretty horrible for a tight end.
Especially for a guy that was known for getting up the seam or up the boundary in that one-on-one coverage in college. That was all he did. And he caught 9 out of 12 contested passes as his last year at Penn State. So I don't know what the plan is or why they're not using him. I know that he really is struggling when it comes to inline blocking and trying to get things down. His footwork kind of looks sloppy at times. I don't think he's quite there yet. So it's probably a confidence issue. And I think they probably trotted that out in that first game on the fade pattern that got picked off and just said, okay, he's not there yet. We'll kind of put him back on the shelf. But like you mentioned, that's going to be a key part to the offense going forward. So hopefully they can get him acclimated sooner rather than later.
And then to go back to Parker for a minute, I wrote an article today for Dolphins Maven, and I just decided to look at this for shits and giggles. So I compared Ted Ginn's stats to DeVante Parker. Parker's been here for 4 years, and his career high for a season in touchdowns is 4. and he's done it once. Ted Ginn was in Miami for 3 years. His career high is 7, and he never had less than 4. Oh my God, that bothered me so much to read.
Well, yeah, especially when you consider the type of players they are. That Ted Ginn was going to be more of a Cam Cameron saying, "Oh, this guy can return punts for us," with the ninth pick in the draft, and then DeVante Parker. It's the same thing with this guy, man. The lack of professionalism. I think the inability to play through, the little nicks and bruises that you're going to have in the NFL. You got our Pro Bowl safety playing with a torn labrum back there, and he's playing, like an All-Pro. And DeVante Parker, has a broken finger a month and a half ago, and he still isn't ready to go. I mean, what's going on there?
Exactly, and I forgot who said it, but I think it was last year. Someone came out. It might have been Gase, and I feel like everyone says it. Where if you're playing football, you're not healthy. You're always going to be hurt. You're always going to be banged up. So, a report came out today that there's a potential DeVante Parker on the trade block, and then Beasley tweeted out. Adam Beasley from the Herald tweeted out that this is not true. The report says the Dolphins are not trying to trade Parker, but the way I look at it, when there's smoke, there's fire. They said the same thing about Jarvis Landry last year, did they not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was something that they kind of made a point about during the season to, I guess plan for the contingency behind him. And I think they have to do the same thing with DeVante Parker this year because, if he's not going to be back long-term on this team, they're going to have to replace that type of role that DeVante Parker fills because we always hear scouts talk about it's kind of like a basketball team these days at wide receiver. You got to have 5 different guys that can bring 5 different traits. And I feel good about what Wilson and Grant and Amendola and Stills do, but they don't have that big body. That's what DeVante Parker is supposed to be. And if, I don't think I think this is his last year no matter what happens, if not this week, whatever it is. But yeah, I think that his failure really kind of is a microcosm of what this offense's failures has been this year and over the past few years. Just the guys they need to step up and become big time players haven't really done it.
Exactly, and there's a lot of fans crying out where I think it was the Raiders game when Wilson and Grant went off, and everyone's like, why aren't these guys playing more? Because I think Wilson had 10 snaps and Grant had 8, but they're just, like you mentioned, the basketball player is like a perfect comparison because you can't get away with these techie plays, these gadget plays every down. It's just not going to work. Teams catch up, and you need someone who can just win a football play, and they just don't have that. But then let's before we jump into the Tannehill talk to end the podcast, I do want to talk about the offensive line because while they haven't given up a lot of pressures, they have not been good. And Juwan James is averaging a penalty a week. Someone mentioned today, I saw on Twitter where they compared him to saying he's the Ryan Tannehill of offensive linemen. And I guess the concept for that is, yes, we think they're really good, but then they do a lot of things that just kind of bring them down to being average because you're just kind of stuck scratching your head and wondering what's going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So first, in regards to Juwan James and the Ryan Tannehill thing, it's almost like a pitcher in baseball where they'll have a game that just throws their ERA way out of whack, and then the next game they come back and they play really well, but their season average isn't quite there. And that kind of seems to be the case with Juwan James right now, where it's either feast or famine with him at right tackle. And you mentioned the offensive line and the struggles they have up front. And the biggest problem that I have with it is what Adam Gase did to adapt his game plan once things went awry. And we saw him move Juwan James to the other side of the line, go unbalanced, and try to help out that way. It didn't really work. But the long developing slow route combinations that take 3 seconds to develop, why are you running those when you have 60% of a backup offensive line in? And I wrote this in my column on LockedOnDolphins.com on Sunday night. He talked about, or I've heard for several years now, or a couple of years now, I should say, that he didn't value the guard position to the point to where that's why we're rolling out Anthony Steen and Jermon Bushrod. Well, this year he kind of takes a step back and says, okay, Jesse Davis and Josh Sitton are both good players. We can roll with them. But then they go out and with injuries that are 60% of the offensive line does, and we're still running these same concepts that take forever to develop. So what is it? Are the guards important or are they not important? And why can't you adapt accordingly? So the offensive line's a mess, and the way they've adapted to it is a total mess too.
It's horrible because I remember that PFF was saying that the Dolphins had 2 of the best tackles in the league in James and Tunsil, but they've combined for 9 penalties. Tunsil has 4. He went out with a concussion. Hopefully he comes back because he was actually playing incredibly well. Tannehill did have a lot of time yesterday when they had Tunsil in, but why on earth has Sam Young been on this team for so long if he's this bad? I just don't understand it. It's the same as the Billy Turners and Dallas Thomas. It's how do you have these guys, you see them play in practice, there's clearly no development, and you're still holding on to them. I just don't seem to get it.
The offensive line's one that I'll actually give the coaches kind of a pass on, just because it's somewhat of a league epidemic across all 32
It's
teams.
true.
Look at the Giants or even the Bengals. I mean, their right side of their line was an absolute mess. Bobby Hart and I think it's Alex Redmond are not NFL starters, and there they are, both starting for the Bengals. So I mean, it's something that to have five good guys is a luxury, and the Dolphins did have that coming into the year, at least five competent guys. And I thought that Sam Young and Ted Larson could be guys that would be good in a pinch. And Ted Larson, now he's a starter. And Sam Young, that's why you bring him in, right? For those 20 snaps when your left tackle goes out, he comes in and holds down the fort. Well, that didn't quite happen. So, yeah, I don't know what you do now, because Zach Stirrup is the next guy in line. And he played Week 17 last year, and he didn't belong on the NFL field either. So I'm kind of at a loss, Jake. I don't really know what you do from here.
Exactly. And this is the perfect segue for the Tannehill talk, because you mentioned it where everyone wants to blame offensive lines and the injuries, but every team goes through it. I mean, I remember the Raiders yesterday started 2 rookie tackles. When the Dolphins faced the Titans, they were without 2 linemen, and in fact, the Bengals were even without their starting center yesterday. So when you're never gonna have a perfect line, you're never gonna have a perfect offense. There's 11 guys you need to do right, so you kind of need players who can mask issues. And I think the one thing that you kind of brought up, you had a really good tweet thread yesterday with Tannehill. He can have the good plays, but I just don't think he's ever going to be the guy that can maybe hide issues on an offense. And I think that was really magnified yesterday.
Yeah, and the Move the Sticks podcast with Daniel Jeremiah is like my favorite football podcast, and they talk all the time about guys that can make a play caller look right. So a play caller, you call the play hoping you get a certain coverage, a certain look, and you attack accordingly. And if the defensive coordinator has your number and makes the right call to counter that move, you need players to make the play call look right. So like a Baker Mayfield's a great example of that, for instance, and obviously the best like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. But I don't think Ryan Tannehill's that guy. I mean, I saw some of it in 2016. He had some of those scramble plays. You get outside of the pocket and make a throw downfield. He's had that in his career, but it's not a regular thing. And the other topic that I want to get into when it comes to Tannehill and quarterback play is, the reason I was so big on Tannehill, Jake, was that 2016 film was really good. It really was like the Game Pass film from the 6 or 7 game stretch was really good quarterback play, and it was complementing what he did well. And I thought they had the same thing going into the year. Things have changed, but you watch the 2018 quarterback and things are different, man. The league changes over the course of 2 years, and now it's about how does the quarterback deal with pressure? How does he internalize where the pressure is going to come before the snap and find a new passing lane to create? And I haven't seen any of that with Tannehill this year. I don't know if you want to put it on his knee or the fact that he still has rust, or maybe he just regressed to the point to where he's not that guy that can do that at all. He never was great at it, but he was getting better. So you have these guys that are escaping pressure, guys that are dealing with these bad circumstances, guys that are consistently throwing for 300 yards. And where is Tannehill in that conversation? He succumbs to pressure. He's throwing for like $175 a game. The game looks like I watch other teams and I just see much better offense out of the quarterback what we've gotten from Ryan Tannehill through 5 games. So, like I said, I think it can get better, but just comparatively, he's playing really bad.
Exactly, and you just hit like the 2 biggest points that I wanted to talk about, and that's making the right play. And a lot of the times the Dolphins run these screen passes, and when I see I hate to compare him to like an Aaron Rodgers or something, but when Aaron Rodgers hits someone with a screen pass, he hits them either in the gut or already has them running forwards. A lot of the time when I see that with Tannehill, he'll complete the pass, but maybe it's Stills or Wilson has to jump for a second to kind of reach up and get the ball, where that kind of just gives the defender enough time to get there. And the feel for the game that it might sound a little cliche and there's no analytics to back this up, but the backyard football, someone who just looks like they're having fun in the backyard, they can dodge some pressure. It just seems like he doesn't have that. And then there are still the times where they mentioned last week with Gase saying Tannehill missed a lot of guys. I think back to the Raiders game where Tannehill missed Stills for a touchdown, and then there was a bunch of flags that brought it. Where it's fine if maybe he's slow and he has to stay in the pocket, but you can't have both sides of the spectrum where he misses these throws on open guys. I think to that 3rd and 1. That 3rd and 1 was the turning point of that game where he could have ran to the first down, and he didn't necessarily do the bad thing because he had Kenny Stills wide open one-on-one down the sideline, but he should have taken a second to plant his feet and throw it where it could go over both their heads and Stills could run under. Instead, he tried to throw it on the run, and he's made the throw in the past. I remember against the Ravens, it was Brandon Gibson on the right sideline, I believe, where he ran and he flicked it, and it got all the way there, but he just didn't have that same feel, and I don't know if he's just lost the feel for football, but it seems like you're on the right track where he can be good, but it's just the inability to mask other players just isn't there.
And I look at what the defense is and what it could become in a couple of years. I mean, if they draft a really well on defense again this year and maybe use some money freed up to go get a couple of free agent key pieces, this defense could become maybe not like Jacksonville Jaguars or Minnesota Vikings, but they could become like a top 10 unit where all you have to do is kind of play within the confines of the system. And I just don't want to do that with a veteran quarterback that costs you a bunch of money and a guy that you have to prop up with everything else around him being good. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So if they're going to do that, I'd almost rather just assume go get a rookie quarterback on a cheap deal. But then the problem becomes who's available, because this draft class is going to be kind of hit or miss, especially where the Dolphins figure to pick probably in that 15 to 20 range once again. But when it comes to Ryan Tannehill, you mentioned some of those weird looking throws. What I've noticed with the way his arm works, and he has some of the best arm talent in the NFL. It's one of the big reasons I love the guy so much coming out and through the first few years of his career. He can drive the football down the field and make all those tight window throws. But anytime he has to like take something off where the arm motion is not a natural like fastball, the ball comes out odd. And you mentioned those little screen passes. It just seems like anytime he can't drive a throw, it comes off kind of funny. So, man, there's a lot of stuff that they have to get cleaned up. And I like I said, I think they can, but I'm definitely much less encouraged than I was before the season started.
Exactly, and I guess the biggest issue, and I'm not saying like I will get right back on the Tannehill bandwagon. I don't say I'm even off it. I don't hate the guy. I just kind of understand the situation. It's not being a hater or anything. But there's so much guaranteed money tied up with this guy, and then to try to build a team around him is very tough. So I think next year it will probably still be him, and we're jumping the gun a lot. I understand that. But I think that they're kind of in like a really tough spot right now where it's up to Gase, where you got to do what's best for your quarterback. Get your tight end involved. Get everybody involved.
Just to kind of go off that last point, it makes you insane because here you are thinking – I wrote an article, Jake, when he first got hired by the Dolphins. I took all these quotes from Peyton Manning, from Wes Welker, from John Elway, talking about how Adam Gase is the smartest football mind they've ever been around, and John Elway saying, I wish I played for Adam Gase when I was younger. And it's you take that, all that knowledge, all the 110 hours per week like he mentions, and then he does stuff like that we're sitting here on our couches as, couch GMs, and it doesn't make sense to us, and it makes you question, like, well, do I know more than him, or does he know more than I do and I'm just not getting it, or why is it failing over and over again? So it's just this, like, perpetual cycle of frustrating, 2 decades worth of frustration boiling up. And I hope he gets it fixed, man. I really don't want to restart. I don't want to restart a coach or quarterback because that always feels like a 2-3 year process. We'll see, man. It could get better. Luckily, they go back home to Hard Rock this week, and that's where they play a lot better. So hopefully things get better from here, and we're 5-2 here in a couple of weeks.
That'd be fantastic. And just to add on that, even Tom Crean, people remember him as Dwayne Wade's coach at Marquette in 2003. He even became a member of the media, and he said nobody knows their sport better than Adam Gase. So I think that just makes things more frustrating when you go from a coach who, is yelling go and go, go. That's the difference between a run and a pass. and this genius, and just nothing's changed. But with that, Travis, thank you so much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. And like I mentioned, LockedOnDolphins.com, at Wingfield NFL. Look for Travis. He is one of the best guys you will find. Thanks for joining me tonight, man.
Thanks a lot, Jake. Appreciate it, man.
Take care.